Well, hello, Confirmands. It is good to see you. Well, I hope you enjoyed your Thanksgiving break. I hope you had a good time with friends and family. And now it's time to get back to work. So this is year 1, lesson 7. We are talking about Jacob and Esau this time. And again, these are stories that we continue to need to know because they are related to the family of God that God's building to give us Jesus. And they're stories that teach us about God, about God's expectations, about God's grace, about God's law. And so these are stories that I would have you know, again, in your bones. They come out of, there's 11 chapters in the Bible that carry these stories. So if you wanted to read those, that would do you a world of good. But many of the stories that we're going to share here are also in your reading. So if you're behind in your reading, get going on your reading. It's really important that we do this thing in order, that we do this thing carefully, that we do it well. And trust me, you will hate it if you have to do the year of reading in just a couple of weeks at the end. You won't learn anything. You won't remember anything. It'll just be awful. So just take 2 minutes a day, 3 minutes a day, and read the little story. And that's the way to do it. The phrase that pays this week, we're kicking into a new sort of more critical mode that, some of you have been giving me 2/3 of the words of the phrase that pays, or most of the words, but not necessarily in the right order. That's not how this game works. So I'm giving it to you as carefully as I can. You can pause the video and you can write it down and go back to the video. And this one is really going to test you. 20 words in this week's phrase that pays. So while we're talking about it, the first 3 words: Piglet noticed that. Piglet noticed that. All right. So we talked about Jacob and Esau being born, these twins, that Jacob started to be born first and then wasn't. Esau was born first, so he's named Harry. He was a furry little monkey. He's named, for that. And Jacob was named Jacob, which means cheater or grasper, because he was holding on to his brother's heel. And that the 2 boys did not get along, and that the family was deeply divided. Dad liked Esau best. Mom liked Jacob best, and the boys didn't like each other very much at all. So they grew up, and one day when they were young men, Esau is coming in from hunting, and he was hungry, and he wanted something to eat. And Jacob just happened to be making some lentil stew, some red stew. And Esau said, "Give me some of that stew." And Jacob said, "Sure, if you give me your birthright." Now, again, we talked about this. The birthright is a double share in the inheritance that an elder son has. It is a huge deal to give up your birthright, right? It's a monumental thing. And Esau, not being a clear thinker, said, "What good is it to me to have a birthright if I'm going to die of hunger? All right, I'll give you my birthright." And Jacob says, "Swear to me." And so Esau swore that he would give Jacob the birthright. Jacob gave him a bowl of stew and some bread, and then he had the birthright. And Esau, when he figured out what he'd done, was very angry, could not believe it. So life went on. The boys liked each other even less than they had before. Esau decided it was time for him to get married, and he married a couple of different women, both of them Hittites, both of them people from around there. Remember, not doing the thing that we've talked about, trying to marry family, trying to keep the blood together. Esau just married who he felt like marrying, a couple of Hittite girls, and they made life very hard for the parents, for Isaac and for Rebekah, and it was not good. It did not go well. You want to just tuck that little story away in your head, because we're going to come back to that. The next 2 words in the phrase that pays: even though. Even though. All right. So time goes on, and one day, old Isaac calls Esau to him, and he says, you know, son, I'm not as young as I used to be. I'm going to be dying here somewhere, and I don't want to die without giving you your blessing. And so why don't you go hunting, make some game for me, cook it just the way I like it, bring it to me, and then I will give you your blessing. So we already talked about the birthright, but now there's a blessing, and the blessing of a father to his sons was carried great weight. It was believed that it was something between a prayer and a prophecy, and that the blessing that a father spoke over his son was effective, was going to happen. So Esau goes off hunting. Now Rebekah had been listening to this conversation, and she called Jacob to herself, and she said, boy, go out in the fields and get a couple of kids, a couple of young goats, and bring them to me. Your dad is going to give Esau the blessing, and we're going to nab it. And Jacob said, that's not going to work. Esau's a hairy guy, and I'm smooth. What if Dad grabs a hold of me? He's going to know that I'm lying to him, and I'm going to get out of there with a curse instead of a blessing. And Rebekah said, look, if there's any curse to be had, let it fall on me. You just obey me. So Jacob went out and got a couple of kids, a couple of goats, and killed them and skinned them. And his mom went to work preparing the food just the way old man Isaac liked it. And then she cut up the hides of those goats, and she wrapped Jacob's arms and neck with those goat hides, with that goat fur. And then she went and got one of Esau's robes and put it on Jacob so that he smelled like Esau and he was furry like Esau. All right, when the kids were cooked, when the goats were cooked, Jacob brought them in to his father, to Isaac, and he said, hello, father, it's me. Isaac said, who's that? He said, it's your son Esau. It was a big fat lie, right? And Isaac said, well, you sound like Jacob. He said, no, it's Esau. And he gave his father the food, and Esau ate it and loved it and thought, okay, well, it is cooked just the way I liked it. And he called the boy to him, come to me, and he grabbed a hold of him, and he felt how furry he was, and he smelled him, and he smelled of the outdoors. He smelled like Esau. And so Isaac thought that Jacob was Esau. You sure you're Esau? Yep, I'm Esau. And so he blessed Jacob with the blessing he intended to give to Esau. And it was a mighty blessing, that God would take care of him, that all of his enemies would fail to overwhelm him, that the weather would cooperate for him, that he would become rich, that he would rule over his brother, and that he would have a life of strength and grace and peace. Just this huge blessing. And as soon as it was done, Jacob got out of there. And he wasn't gone very long at all before Esau came in with meat from his hunt to give to his dad to get the blessing. And he said, Father, it's me. It's your son. Who is it? It's Esau. I've come for my blessing. And then Isaac figured out what had happened. And he told Esau, and Esau was so mad. And he said, don't you have any blessing left for me, Father? And Isaac said, I gave everything to your brother. He took it all. Don't you have anything for me? And he wept. And Isaac finally said, well, okay. And he blessed him this secondary blessing that, you're going to serve your brother and you're going to live by the sword, but someday maybe you'll be able to break your brother's power and live your own life. That's the best he could do. Oh, Esau was mad. And Esau said, I am going to kill my brother Jacob. As soon as Dad dies, I am going to kill Jacob. So Rebekah heard this, and she said to Jacob, you got to get out of here. You got to go back to my family. Go find my brother Laban. Stay there for a while. I'll call you when it's safe to come home, but Esau wants you dead, and we got to get you out of here. So Jacob flew the coop. He got out of there. He went down the road. He went to Laban's house, and Esau was left with all of his feelings and all of his fury. All right? The next words in the phrase that pays, he had. He had. Now, Esau figured out when they told him that Jacob was gone, what the deal was, is that mom was protecting him. The mom had sent him back to her family, and the story was that she'd gone to Isaac and said to him, I don't want our little Jacob to marry any of these horrible Hittite girls like Esau did. My life is hard enough right now with 2 of them around. I don't want more. Let's send him to my family so that he can find himself a wife. And Isaac agreed with that and sent him away. And when Esau learned that whole story, he decided that he should do right by his parents. And so he went and found his uncle Ishmael and married one of Ishmael's daughters as his 3rd wife. So, a little complicated domestic scene unfolding here. Anyway, Jacob is on his way to Haran. He's on his way to Laban's house, and night comes, and this is quite a journey. Night comes, and he gets a rock for a pillow, and he lays down, and as he's sleeping, he has a dream where he sees the heavens opened and a ladder up to heaven, and angels ascending and descending on this ladder, and he wakes up and he says, I was in the house of God and I didn't even know it. And so he sets up that rock that he'd used as a pillow, and he pours oil on it, and he consecrates it as a holy place, and he calls the place Bethel, and it becomes a place of significance and worship from that time forward. Next 4 words: a very small heart. Next 4 words of the phrase that pays: a very small heart. At any rate, Jacob goes to Haran, and when he's there, he meets Rachel, his cousin. So his mom is Rebecca. Rebecca is brother and sister with Laban. Rachel is Laban's daughter. He meets Rachel, and she just stops his heart. He thinks that she is the prettiest, most wonderful girl that he's ever seen in his whole life. And he gives her a kiss on the cheek, and he weeps, and it freaks her out, and she runs and tells her dad, that there's the guy here who says he's family. Laban runs out, grabs a hold of him, says, who are you? And he says, I'm Rebecca's boy. And they're very happy to see each other. And Laban invites Jacob into their house. And they have a nice party. And for the next month, not much happens. He just hangs out at Laban's house, undoubtedly flirting with Rachel. And after a month, Laban says, what do you want to do? How can I help you? How are you going to spend this time that you're here? And Jacob says, well, I'd like to marry your daughter Rachel. And Laban says, well, I just as soon marry her to you as to a stranger. That's fine, but what are you going to give me for her? I mean, in these days, you pretty much bought yourself a wife. And Jacob and Laban talk about it, and they agree that Jacob is going to work for Laban for 7 years in order to earn the bride price to claim Rachel, and that he's going to work for 7 years, and that after that, he's going to be allowed to marry Rachel. So he works, and the 7 years, they go by just boom, because he is so in love with Rachel, and he just can't wait to be married to her. So the 7 years are up. He goes to Laban and he says, okay, it's time for me to marry Rachel. I'm very excited about this. Let's get this show on the road. Laban puts together a big party and calls all the friends and family, and they have a big to-do. And then, at nighttime, there's no light bulbs. Right? There's no electric lights. Right? You got fires and you got torches. Right? That night, Laban doesn't send Rachel into the tent with Jacob. He sends her big sister Leah. Jacob doesn't have any interest in Leah. He wants Rachel. And, he doesn't know who he's got there in the honeymoon tent. But the next morning, when the sun comes up, he is shocked, horrified, appalled to see that he is now married to Leah instead of to Rachel. And he's mad. He hits the roof. He goes and he finds Laban. He goes, what is this thing that you've done to me? I worked 7 years for Rachel. And Laban says, hey, in our culture, big sister gets married before little sister. Tell you what, you work for me another 7 years, you can have Rachel. And Jacob, all right, but listen, I want Rachel now, and then I'll work the 7 years. So Laban agrees with that. Jacob marries Rachel. This time it actually is Rachel. And in the space of about 10 days, he's married these 2 sisters, right? And then he goes back to work for Laban for another 7 years. Next 3 words, it could hold. It could hold. All right, so he's working for Laban. He's got these 2 wives. He doesn't manage to have any children with Rachel, but Leah proves to be very good at giving him sons, and over time gives him 6 sons. Now, both of these women have maids. Both of them have female slaves. And Rachel decides to do the thing we've talked about, to give her slave girl to her husband so that she can have a baby through the slave girl. Right? Remember, if the baby's born on the legs of the other woman, it's considered her baby. We've talked about this. So Jacob has a couple of kids with Rachel's slave woman. And then Leah figures out what the score is, and she gives her slave woman to her husband, and he has kids with her as well. Finally, Jacob and Rachel have a son named Joseph. You might want to put that name away. We're going to get to that. And so, in short order, he has 11 sons and a daughter. Her name's Diana, from these 4 women. Now, when the 14 years are up and he still can't go home, he has something else to do, and he and Laban make another deal that he'll work for Laban in exchange for some of the herds that Laban has. But Joseph says to him, I don't want you to ever think that I stole from you. So I will take, the speckled goats and the striped goats and sheep and the black sheep. I'll take those, and you keep the ones that are white. And Laban thought, and he went out he sent his other sons through the herds, and they called out all those colored sheep and goats, and they hit them. They sent them 3 days away. Laban sent all those other sheep and goats with his sons 3 days away. So, we're starting with a flock that has no animals that have speckles or stripes, and it's unlikely that Jacob's going to get any, right? But God is taking care of him. And God arranges it so that there's this explosion of speckled and striped sheep and goats. You can read about the details in the Bible story, but the bottom line is that God makes sure that Jacob does pretty well here. And Laban keeps changing the rules, and every time Laban changes the rules, God just makes the sheep and the goats breed the way that benefits Jacob. And the strongest animals wind up with Jacob. He just gets rich at his father-in-law's expense. But his father-in-law is trying desperately to cheat him this whole time, right? That there's a whole lot of bad will between these 2 men. The next 2 words of the phrase that pays are a rather. A rather. Okay, so this goes on for the 6 years, and Jacob figures out that Laban is getting really fed up with him, and he thinks that there's going to be trouble. I mean, Laban has a big outfit. He has hundreds of guys enslaved and hundreds of guys working for him, and Jacob figures out that it's time to go, and so he tells his wives and the slave women, get packed up. Laban's gone for a couple of days. Let's get out of here. Let's head back to my father's house. So that's what happens. Laban disappears for a couple of days, and everyone just hits the road. And Laban comes back, and everyone is gone. Jacob's stuff is gone. The animals are gone. And Laban doesn't like this. He feels like he's been stolen from. He feels like the family has abandoned him. And so he gets his 400 guys and they go chasing after him and they catch up to them. But God tells Laban in a dream the night before he catches up to Jacob, hey, Jacob's got my protection. He's got my mark. Don't you do anything to Jacob. So by the time Laban catches up with Jacob, he doesn't want to fight at all. He just wants to say goodbye. He's mad about some things. You can read about that in the Bible and ask questions if you want, but he's not going to hurt Jacob. He's certainly not going to attack his daughters or the maids or the children. But Laban and Jacob, they hammer things out. They make a covenant. They make a deal with each other. They build an altar and they agree that they will never pass the altar to do the other one harm, right? That it's going to be between them as a perpetual witness. And they agree to part as friends and family. And Laban says goodbye to his daughters and to his grandchildren, and he heads back home. The next word of the phrase that pays is large. Large. All right. So they continue home, and Jacob knows that he is going to run into his brother soon. He sends messengers ahead to tell his brother that he's coming. And the messengers come back and they say, yeah, we found Esau, and he's following us, and he's bringing a small army with him. So yeah, he's coming. And Jacob is terrified, right? And so he peels off, a huge gift of animals, dozens and dozens and dozens of animals of different kinds, and he starts sending them out in waves ahead of him, right? And a group of shepherds would take the donkeys, take the goats, take the sheep, take the camels, take the cattle, right? These waves with spaces in between, and each one was supposed to say, this is a gift to you, Esau, from your brother who is following behind us. And so that starts. Meanwhile, Jacob divides his family, and he figures, that if Esau attacks one part of it, at least the other will survive. And so he divides the family, thinking that he's going to send them in different directions. And the night before he's going to meet Esau, he goes to sleep, and in the night, he's attacked by someone. It turns out that it's the angel of the Lord, but he doesn't know that. And they wrestle and they fight all night long. And in the morning, when the morning light's breaking, the angel says to him, "Let me go." And Jacob says, "I won't let you go until you bless me." And the angel smacks him on the hip. The angel of the Lord smacks him on the hip and puts the hip out of joint. And still Jacob won't let go. And so the angel blesses him and says, your name has been Jacob, but now it's Israel. You've contested with God and with man, and you have prevailed. And then Jacob lets him go, and he realizes that he's been wrestling with the angel of the Lord, and he is astonished that he hasn't died in that process. And so again, he builds another little altar there. Next word in the phrase that pays is the word amount. So the next day, now Israel is his name, feels like God's going to protect him and preserve him. So he changes his plan a little bit, and he sends his family out in waves, right? First he sends the maids, and then he sends Leah, and then he sends Rachel and Joseph, all of them, all these women with their children. And finally he comes, and he meets Esau, and he bows down before him, and Esau runs to him and scoops him up and hugs him and welcomes him back and says, I'm just drowning in animals. Why are all these animals coming to me? And Jacob said, they're a gift for you. And Esau said, I don't need them. I got all I need. You keep your stuff. And Jacob said, no, those are for you. Please keep them. So Esau agrees to keep them. He offers to travel with Jacob and the family. And Jacob says, no, I got little kids. We got a whole lot of animals. We're going to go slower than you. You just take what I sent you and you head back wherever you're going, and we'll see each other soon. And Esau agrees to that. So there's no There's no violence, there's no murder. After 20 years, everyone's temper has cooled and everyone has grown up. Jacob's been cheated a lot, so he understands better what he did. Esau has calmed down, and God has provided for him. The next words of the phrase that pays, of gratitude, of gratitude. And then Jacob goes back to Bethel. He goes back to the place where he first had the dream when he started out, when he went to Haran, and he stays there for a little bit. He has his family there. He has his animals there. He grows in wealth. He grows in power. And then we will get to what happens next week. All right. It is good to see you again. I hope you're well. Again, I hope your Thanksgiving was good. And I'm looking forward to talking to you on Wednesday, either online or in person. I do want you to have good questions about this story. There's lots here. Lots of weird family stuff, lots of custom stuff, and lots of stuff about the promises and purposes of God. So you're ready. And I will have you know that, I think it's 3/4 of you haven't said a word yet on a Wednesday. That I got 5 or 6 of you who are just killing it, and I'm grateful for that. But we got to get more people talking too. So I did order, and I have gotten the tumbling drum of apathetic shame, and we're going to start drawing names out of it on this next Wednesday. So show up prepared, have some questions. So if I draw your name, you can stand and deliver. All right? You take care. Again, I hope you had a great Thanksgiving. Bye.